Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. I've just got one minor hitch at the moment, so we'll be starting very shortly. Okay, sorry about that. Welcome everyone to Star Business Solutions 2019 webinar series. This is the first for the year. We're doing it on cybersecurity, what you need to know. If anyone can't hear us, then obviously we won't be able to reply, but if you have difficulties, just make a note in the chat area. My name's Norman Hall. I'm the Director of Marketing for Star Business Solutions, and today we have a guest speaker helping us, and I'll go through Owen's details in a moment. Please hold all of your questions to the end of the webinar. Write them in as we go, and we'll address them at the end. Today's presenter will be Owen Johnson. He's the Managing Director for ComVision Australia. We'll be going through a few different areas on cybersecurity, about why it's a business problem, not just for large internationals, but for small to medium-sized business as well. We'll also give you some strategies to understand how to mitigate the risks of cybercrime. We'll also point out why your own people are probably the biggest risk to your business. Not that they do anything intentional, but it is an area where cyber criminals tend to get into people's computer systems. We'll also talk about what available help is out there for you, and then we will take some questions. Owen Johnson, as I said, is the Managing Director for ComVision Australia. He is the founder of ComVision, which has been going for in excess of 15 years. They concentrate on cybersecurity and also do computer services for medium to larger organisations. So I will now hand you over to Owen, and he can start answering some of those questions that no doubt you have in your minds.
Great, thanks Norman, and thank you very much for everybody for joining us today. So what I'd like to start with is, I guess, trying to address the first question that everybody always has when we talk about cybersecurity, and in business particular, and especially outside of larger organisations, is why should I care? And so that's what I'd like to try to address today, is to talk about why cybersecurity is a risk and should be a concern and should be part of the conversation for every single business. So what I'm not here to do today is, I'm not here to scaremonger. I'm here to try to get across some of the facts behind cybersecurity, and as I said, why it needs to be part of the conversation for business. But with that being said, one of the best comments that I've heard regarding cybersecurity was from a former senior advisor to the US government, who gave a talk at a conference that I was at, and he said, if as a business leader you can sleep soundly at night, then you just don't understand cybersecurity well enough yet. And that really stuck with me, because one of the biggest weapons in a cyber criminal's arsenal isn't fancy software and code that they write or anything like that. The biggest advantage that they have is the ambivalence and apathy of the majority of organisations to the risk that cybersecurity actually poses to their business. And likewise, for somebody like me who is in the business of trying to prevent organisations from being breached and being hacked and having their operations interrupted, the biggest adversary that I face is not the cyber criminals themselves, but that same ambivalence, that same, I guess, lack of understanding and lack of desire to try to fix the problems that are inherent in effectively every organisation in terms of their cybersecurity. So I'm also not here to give a deep technical talk. This is meant to be more about the business implications of cybersecurity and why it's more of a risk management process. really, to get into a deep technical talk, you need to understand the business first. You need to understand your own business's individual risks and exposure points, and then look at what technology and solutions can be put in place to fix that. So what I am here to do, though, is to hopefully demystify cybersecurity. There's a lot of information out there. You know, I attend probably a half dozen conferences every year, and there's so much information available, and a lot of it is just really really confusing. There's a lot of conflicting information. So what I'm here to do is try to demystify things as much as possible. And as I said, demonstrate why it's a concern for every single business. Cybersecurity isn't just a risk for the big players that you hear being breached, like Equifax and Facebook and MyFitnessPal a few days ago. It is a concern for every business, and businesses are suffering severely from this. Businesses are failing because of cybersecurity breaches and not having appropriate measures in place. We've had referrals into several businesses who've had ransomware attacks be successfully deployed to them that have encrypted all of their data and have also managed to encrypt all of their backups. And some of those businesses don't exist anymore because they just weren't able to get their data back. And so what I'm also here to do is demonstrate that cybersecurity is a business problem and not just an IT problem. Cybersecurity isn't just something that you can throw to your IT professional or your IT department and say, fix the issue. It is a business problem that needs to be understood by the senior people of the business so that they can direct the strategy and understand what their own risk appetite is, what risks they're prepared to accept, what risks they're not prepared to accept, what the implications to the business are, and from that you can then go to form strategies with the help of the IT professionals. I'd also like to establish that an investment in cybersecurity is an investment in revenue protection. Essentially, a lot of people see cybersecurity as a cost bucket, and it's something that you just throw money into that you don't see any return of, because essentially your best return is that nothing ever happens. So it can be very hard for people to get a measurable outcome on investment that they make in cybersecurity. But there are lots of ways in which business revenue can be severely impacted by even minor cybersecurity incidents. So we'll talk about why an investment in cybersecurity is an investment in revenue protection. And then also help provide a framework to help organisations manage their cybersecurity risk without having to be tech gurus. So really apply the same business processes and principles that you would to any other part of your business to this, and then obviously engage with professional organisations and people to get the help from there. And then I will provide some universal advice on that any business can apply to have as a starting point for securing themselves and their organisation. There are some commonalities across pretty much every business, and we'll lightly touch on those. So one of the most important things that that you can have when implementing any kind of cybersecurity plan or cybersecurity uplift process is to get engagement from the owner of the company, from the board, from the senior executives. Any plan in terms of cybersecurity that isn't driven from the top of the organisation will end up being one of those cost buckets where people will do what they think is the best thing, but they won't be doing it with the best strategic interests of the organisation or with that high level overview. So I've given a lot of these talks. I go and do a lot of presentations to boards about their cybersecurity exposure and risk and what they can do about it. And so there are some really common opening remarks that I typically hear when I give these type of presentations. First one is, why would anybody care about our data? And that's one of the biggest ones that we hear is, well, we're just a small organisation, you know, we've only got 50 people or we've only got 100 people, we're just a small manufacturer or a professional services firm. Why would anybody care about our data? In the modern day and age and the age of big data, lots of disparate parts of information can be joined together to form really useful bits of information. So I could steal someone's name and phone number from one company and then get a match on that phone number and then get their date of birth from another organisation. And really quickly, by gathering lots of bits of information together, you can build up profiles of people to allow you to do identity theft and all those sorts of things. So really every single piece of information that every company holds about themselves, their employees, their clients, their pricing lists, all of that is valuable. I also hear, well, we've never been attacked before, so our security must be good. 74% of companies that have suffered a data breach don't actually know how it happened, and quite often don't know that it happened until several months or several years after the fact, when their data starts surfacing online and they start getting notifications that they've had a breach. So thinking that you're safe because you haven't knowingly had a breach doesn't necessarily mean that you haven't. Another common one, as I spoke about, is we're too small. Nobody would bother about us. Small business and medium business and mid-sized enterprise actually accounts for almost half of all of cybercrime. And the reason behind that is that smaller and medium business don't have the level of investment in cybersecurity that the larger organizations do, which makes them a bigger, easier target. Yes, if you can get into an Equifax, if you can get into a Facebook, if you can get into a MyFitnessPal, you can make big money from that because you're getting millions of records at once. But if you are sending out millions of scripted hacking attempts to smaller organizations all day, every day, over a very small amount of time, you'll be able to gather up hundreds, thousands of records, launch ransomware attacks on thousands of organizations, and make really big money and do it really easily because so many organizations don't have even the most basic security defenses in place. Another one is, well, we've got our up-to-date antivirus software, so we're protected. 87% of businesses believe that their business is safe from cyber attacks because they've got antivirus software. Antivirus software is effectively useless against most modern forms of cyber attacks. Antivirus software typically relies on knowing exactly what a virus looks like and detecting it from a database of signatures. Most viruses now aren't even viruses, they're malware that use inbuilt tools in Windows and other operating systems to do the work for them. And so most antivirus software will just not detect any of these sort of infections. A lot of people say, well, I can't see why I need to spend this much money on our cybersecurity. And the reason is that the average global cost of a data breach is now up to $3.86 million US per breach. So there's big money that is being lost by organizations when they have a cyber breach. And even at the smaller organizations, we've worked with companies who, with 100 people whose downtime per hour cost them about $20,000 per hour in downtime. They've calculated by the time they have their staff costs, their, lost production, all those sorts of things. So if we have to take an IT system offline for a day or two to clean up a ransomware attack, recover files from backup, try to kick somebody out of a network and work out how they've gained access, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, which for any small organization, myself included, would be almost crippling. So it really is something that needs to be looked at. We get, well, our IT guys say that we're safe, they've told us that we're protected, which is great, but as a business owner, I'd want to actually have some measurable metrics around that. So how are they reporting back to the business that they're safe? Are they giving statistical reports? Are they giving training and imparting knowledge to your team? How is it that they're actually verifying to you as a senior business executive or owner that the business is safe? And the biggest one that we have every single day is, it won't happen to us. And as I was saying before, this kind of attitude and this apathy towards cybersecurity is what lets attackers really easily breach organizations. So there's a link on this slide here which goes to an Australian government publication that they put out last year called the Stay Smart Online Guide for Small Business. And in that, they state that 59% of Australian organisations have their business operations interrupted by cybercrime every month. So over half of all businesses have some kind of interruption to their business because of a cyber attack every single month. And these statistics are really frightening. And this is why I'm trying to get this information across to as many businesses as we can so that we can help. And so the very last response that we don't get often, but when we do, it's exactly what we're looking for, is, I know this is important, but I don't know why, and I don't know what to do about it. And so that's what I'm here to talk about today. And so cybersecurity is a business problem because cybercrime is a risk to every single business every single day. It is a case of when, not if, a company is going to be breached, with 59% of companies getting some kind of interruption and breach every month. Cybercrime absolutely never sleeps. Most of the work is done by pre-scripted computer programs that are attacking millions of businesses every single day, or sending millions of emails every single day. So it just keeps happening all day, every day. There are 360,000 new exploits or viruses written every single day. And the reason behind that is that there's just so much money to be made out of cybercrime. People are really heavily invested in reinvesting in finding new ways to breach people. Cybercrime doesn't know any borders. So the majority of attacks on Australian businesses actually originate from offshore. And the reason behind that is that it's really hard to prosecute across borders. So, you know, even if somebody gets detected and caught and those sorts of things, the chances of an Australian police force being able to prosecute someone in China, the Ukraine, North Korea, Russia is practically nil. So it's really easy to be done, which makes it a really low risk, high return proposition for crime, which obviously makes it much more incentivizing as well. And also, cyber resilience within your company requires a business-wide buy-in and a multidisciplinary approach. So you have to get that engagement from the senior people in the business. You need the IT people there to be able to provide the expertise, and then you need to get your whole organisation on board in terms of buying into this cyber-aware, cyber-resilient culture. And we'll talk a bit more about that soon. So cybercrime impacts the bottom line of businesses in really big ways, and in several different ways. So there's obviously the direct financial loss. So that's through, you know, fraud or blackmail through ransomware. There's regulatory fines to consider as well. So Australia last year implemented the notifiable data breach scheme, which means that for organisations that suffer a breach that involves individuals' data being compromised, so, you know, their dates of birth, their name, their address, phone number, anything like that, there are fines of up to $2.1 million for organisations, and personal fines of $420,000 for directors of those organisations who've been found to have been negligent in their duty as a director of an organisation. Anybody that deals with Europe or any European citizens is then subject to the European GDPR laws, which also came in last year, which states that up to 20 million euros or 4% of total turnover can be fined to an organisation. That's a globally enforceable fine. Obviously, there's downtime and productivity loss. So downtime and productivity loss is one of those things that can be hard to measure, but when you actually sit down and do the metrics on it, the downtime and the cost per hour for a company can be huge. You know, if you're a manufacturer who suddenly has all of your lines offline because you can't produce anything, the cost there can be huge. If you're a professional services organisation, your people can't be charging their time, the cost can be huge. Even a day's worth of downtime can be hundreds of thousands of dollars for a mid-sized organisation. One of the big ones, obviously, is reputational damage or contractual breach. So we're seeing a lot of organisations now having clauses written into contracts that they're taking out with their clients that are stating that regardless of any other laws like the notifiable data breach law that comes into effect, that if they suffer a data breach, that they have to notify their customers, that that contracts can be terminated. You know, there are huge consequences for a lot of organisations, and this is becoming more and more commonplace as larger organisations are becoming aware of what's called supply chain risk, where larger organisations can be breached because the people that they deal with down their supply chain get breached, and then it flows upwards from there. And obviously, from a consumer and customer point of view as well, if you have to go and tell your customers, well, I'm sorry, we've just lost your data, or your credit card details or your bank account details have been taken, or, you know, we've been used as a launching point to attack your organisation, you're going to have a lot of unhappy clients out there who, you know, statistics say that 1/3 of people would stop doing business with an organisation if their data was breached. So huge impacts there. If you're a company that has some kind of intellectual property, then that's obviously really valuable for attackers because they can on-sell that. You also then become a target for state-sponsored attacks. You know, there's been a lot of really high-profile attacks on American and Australian organisations who work in defence or anything like that from China. You know, they're obviously trying to get as much trade leverage as possible. So the theft of intellectual property is really high and can obviously be hugely damaging to organisations. We worked with one business who got us in to help them after they turned up to a trade show in the US and found 2 stalls down from them, a company from India who was selling their product, identical product, at half the price that they were, and they'd lost their intellectual property because of an insider threat. Somebody had had a brother-in-law back in India, ran a manufacturing company, sent all of their IP off to their brother-in-law, and away they went. And, you know, the millions of dollars that they'd invested in this intellectual property was suddenly very much at risk, because trying to get a company in India to shut down their manufacturing operations because of an intellectual property theft is very, very difficult. So that was a huge consequence for them. And finally, but not of any less importance, is, as I mentioned, it can end businesses. We've gone and talked with multiple businesses now who are no longer in operation because they just simply lost all of their data, and it was going to be too expensive and too difficult for them to get it back. And so it was easier for them, or they were forced to close their doors. And so it is ending businesses every single day. Statistics say that 60% of businesses that lose their data because of an attack are shut down within 6 months. And these statistics are borne out in what we're seeing as well. So if we look at this, 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been giving this talk to businesses. The threat landscape to organisations because of cybercrime has dramatically changed over the past 2 or 3 years. You know, the rise of ransomware, the rise of the monetisation of a cybercrime, as opposed to just being an annoyance, to now being something that is really very largely monetarily driven, means that it is an exponentially increasing cost to business. So back in 2014, the global cost was about 445 billion. In 2017, that raised up to 600 billion. This year, it's expected to be $2 trillion global cost, rising to $6 trillion in 2021, which represents a 3% of global GDP. So basically 3% of our global output will be knocked off because of cybercrime, which is a huge amount of money. And so when you've got this sort of money flowing around, you can see why people are reinvesting, why organised crime is happy to start reinvesting their money in just finding new ways to breach organisations, steal their data, you know, get ransomware, basically make more money. What we find really difficult for Australian organisations, and particularly Australian organisations in the SME and mid-market space, is actually getting the skill set to try to combat the problem. So CSO magazine had an article a little while ago saying that of all of the advertised positions on Seek and all of the other places that advertise IT skill positions, only 7% of them that require cybersecurity skills are being filled, which means that there is a huge gap between the demand for people wanting to get people with the expertise to help secure their businesses and them actually being able to fill that gap. And so what we're finding is that it's really difficult to get access to people with that skill set. As I said, the SME and mid-market space are particularly vulnerable because all of the people with these skills are going to the big businesses, they're going to the banks, they're going to the larger enterprise organisations because they're paying huge money because the cost to larger enterprises for cybercrime is just so big. And so Australia as a country as well is also falling behind the pace. You know, the Victorian government has actually just launched a free TAFE course for cybersecurity skills because they're trying to generate more people in this market, because the Australian government recognises that this threat is so damaging to our country and to our GDP. And so my aim and the aim of my company is to try to help as many organisations as we can fill this skills gap in as many ways as we can. And so when I'm talking about this cybercrime, this isn't just me saying it. This isn't me as an industry professional trying to drum up business or anything like that. This is all flowing down from the Australian government. They are very seriously concerned about the threat to business. And so you go to any of the Australian government websites, you go to ASIC, you go to the ATO, you go to cyber.gov.au, which is a specialist website that's just recently been launched by the ASD and the ACSC, who are the two Australian departments sort of in charge of our national cyber security. And you go to the Small Business Ombudsman website. Every single government website has a section on cybersecurity, and they all are saying largely the same things. So ASIC, say, given the magnitude and provenance of cyber risk for most organisations, informed oversight of risk involves the board being satisfied that cyber risks are adequately addressed by the risk management framework of the organisation, which is basically them saying that as a board, as business owners, as business leaders, every organisation needs to be taking charge and responsibility of their cybersecurity, and they can't be doing it after the fact. They need to be proactively getting in front of these things. And they're also saying that basically this is broadly true across all industries, that it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what industry you work in. To combat this threat needs effective leadership and good governance. And so one of the key points that I really try to get across to business is that cyber risk is just another risk. It's like any other risk that you would try to manage through your business. And you can apply the exact same risk management frameworks to do this. And that's why to start this process off, you don't need to be a cybersecurity guru. You don't need to be an IT guru. You just need to start a risk management process, get somebody who can assess your business and sort of explain to you what your risk points are, what your how people could breach you, how you could be damaged, and then plug that into a risk matrix. And then you can actually have some workable information around what your own risk appetite is, what things you're prepared to mitigate, what things you're prepared to let go. And so cybersecurity is just another business problem to be managed. And so it's not something, though, that you can just give to the IT people and say, well, you guys take care of it now. Because the IT team, they can't give you a quantitative analysis of what an hour or a day or a week of downtime would mean for your business. They can't decide how much money you should be spending on this. You know, all of these sorts of things need to be decided by the people at the top of the organisation in line with the strategic direction, budget, those sorts of things. Now, they can't. An IT person can't go and tell the board what their risk appetite should be. Some companies are prepared to take huge risks because, you know, they're in a particular phase of their business and they need to invest elsewhere. Other companies don't want any risks at all. They want to try to lock down every single potential avenue of attack and not have any risk. But the IT people can't tell you that. That needs to be a business decision. And so, as I said, the senior leadership of a company don't need to be subject matter experts. They just need to be able to consult and deal with the technical people so that they can make sure that they've got the right information and can make good business decisions. And so one of the things that I like to say as well is that accepting risk is okay. You know, when we're going and doing audits for companies and we're helping them determine their risks, we're perfectly happy for them to accept any risk that they want to, as long as it's being done with knowledge and intent. If you don't know what your risks are and you're just burying your head in your sand and hoping that everything will be okay, well, that's not accepting risk, that's flying blind. You need to, as a business, really have that understanding of what your risks are. And then, yes, if you choose to accept the risk, that's okay, but as long as it's been done with the correct information. So moving on from that, who is a cyber criminal? Now, this is typically, you know, I went and grabbed this image off one of the stock image pages, and there's thousands of images you see like this. Any news article that you read will have a guy in a black hoodie and he'll have his black gloves on and there's the matrix code going on the screen. That's not what a cyber criminal is. A cyber criminal is not typically these days a hacker. What a cyber criminal is somebody sitting in an office like this. Cybercrime is now almost a 9-to-5 job. There are people that are getting essentially hired straight out of university or are being basically herded into big call center rooms to try to do cybercrime, because it's an organized business. The money behind this, it's not just some, you know, lone keyboard hero sitting behind a computer drinking Red Bull at 3 in the morning trying to hack into your firewall. They don't bother doing that sort of stuff. They have set playbooks, they have procedures, they have policies. They say, send this particular email to this subset of people because our data shows that we get a 12% click rate when we send this type of email to this type of organization. And then when you get access, run this command, and this command, and then we'll have full administrative control over the organization, or we'll have just launched a successful ransomware attack, or now we'll be able to start siphoning you know, important information out of that company. It's a very organized thing, and it's not just that guy in a hoodie sitting behind a computer with a Red Bull anymore. And so what you commonly see is that one of the key intents of cyber criminals is to gain control over as many systems as possible, because they can leverage the scale of the internet. You know, the scale that we're dealing with here, it's a numbers game. You know, if they have 10,000 computers infected that they can use to send emails on their behalf, they can then go and try to target tens of millions of email addresses. And then once they've got that, they can start getting back all of those systems. You know, they're not using their own computing resources. They're not even directly involved. They're just sending commands to computers that they already control to act on their behalf, which means that they can scale this massively to be attacking millions of businesses and millions of people every single day. And so I wanted to kind of illustrate how easy this is and why it's a numbers game. I've got some maths of a ransomware attack. So ransomware is that one where you click on a link in an email, and all of a sudden you see a message pop up on all the computers in your office saying that all of your data has been encrypted and you need to start paying Bitcoins to get it back. It's one of the most common attacks done these days, and I'll demonstrate why. So it's about $500 for the usage of a botnet. So a botnet is a group of computers that can be used to launch attacks on your behalf. So it's about $500 a day to send, say, 100,000 emails to with a link to a custom ransomware payload that you might have downloaded off the internet. If you get 0.1% of people clicking on the link, so say 1 in 1,000, they've now got 100 infected IT systems with ransomware. Of those 100, if only one single company chooses to pay the ransom, which currently sits at about just over $1,000 for a day's work, they've got a $1,000 return for a $500 spend. So that's a 200% ROI. It's a pretty good day's work. But here are the real maths using real statistics behind a ransomware attack. So same deal, about $500 to use a botnet, send 100,000 emails. Current statistics are that, and again, this is backed up by us when we launch our own, fake phishing attempts on our clients. 12% of people click on the link, which means they now have 12,000 infected IT systems. Of those 12,000, 1 in 4 will choose to pay the ransom, which means that they now have a $3 million return on a $500 spend. So that is 6,000% ROI for 1 day's work, which makes me think that I'm in the wrong side of this business, to be honest. So, as I said, the Australian government is really concerned about this stuff, and the AFP has got some statistics to back this up as well. So I was at a talk a little while ago where one of the senior guys from the AFP cybercrime department was giving some statistics around this stuff. Cybercrime is now bigger than the drug trade in Australia. Now, everybody, me included, thinks as drugs as our, as one of our big crime epidemics, but cybercrime has actually now overtaken it. Cybercrime is now the second most reported crime in Australia. So again, this is not just one of those things where we hear about it in the newspaper where a big organisation gets hit. It is hitting thousands of Australian businesses every single day, which is why it's now the second most reported crime in Australia and really is considered our national crime. As I said, the majority of cybercrime in Australia originates from overseas, which basically makes recovery of stolen funds or prosecution of crimes virtually impossible. It is very much an easy to get away with, a risk-free crime, which is why organised crime is moving out of the drug trade and weapons and burglary and those sort of things and into cybercrime. And so despite all of this, the AFP also report that only 37% of organisations have any kind of cyber incident response plan in place. 61% of CEOs are concerned about cybersecurity, but less than half of board members actually go and request information about their organisation's cybersecurity defences and policies. So everybody, people are worried about it, but not many people are actually doing anything about it. And so if you're a criminal, why would you bother robbing a bank? Why would you bother going to sell drugs? Why would you not just continually take a portion of the money that you're making from cybercrime and continue to reinvest it in new ways to break into businesses and get paid or steal their data? And that's why it is such a growing and exponentially growing threat, is because it's risk-free, high return. And this is especially true when, as organizations, we keep giving people new ways to do it. You know, we've got Internet of Things, which means that companies and homes now have internet connected devices everywhere. You know, I know in my house alone, I think I worked out I've got about 20 different devices that connect to the internet. Every single one of those devices are effectively accessible via the internet. So if there's a flaw in one of them, people can use that flaw to gain access into your business or into your home and start stealing information. And so when we talk about this stuff, there's lots of really scary statistics, as I've spoken about. And one of the things that I really try to get across is that most of cybercrime in Australia is not directly targeted. It is not somebody looking up your company on the internet and going, I want to target them. What they're actually doing is targeting 1 million businesses in a day, and they're doing it every single day. So it's more threats of, or it's more crimes of opportunity than it is actually targeted crimes. And so the analogy that I like to use is that it's almost like a petty thief walking down a row of houses and just rattling the doorknobs on every single house, because they know that on that row of houses on a street, at least one of those houses will have left their front door unlocked and they'll be free to walk in and take what they want. And so what we want to help businesses do is to lock the front door. You know, as I said, the most common type of cyber criminal is an opportunist. And so if we can take away the most common methods that they use to gain entry, you know, the equivalent of locking the front door, putting some bars on the window, putting a security camera out the front, then what they're going to do is just simply move on to the next house, or in this case, the next business. If they try to hack into your email and they've stolen someone's password, but then they get a 2-factor authentication prompt, they're going to go, well, I'm not going to bother trying to break that. Why would I bother investing time in breaking into this company when I can just move on to the next company, because the chances are that they won't have the same sort of security in place, and I'll just be able to walk in the front door. And so, as I said, the analogy of walking down the street and rattling the doorknobs is good, except that they're not just walking down the street, they're walking down 1 million streets at once, trying 1 million different front doors at once. And so what we really want to do is just help businesses take care of those really easy ways to get in. And so, you know, we're not talking super sophistication here, but just take care of those easy ways to get in to make our house harder to break into than our neighbours. And so what can we do about it? So part of the problem that we have, as we said, is that it is a constantly evolving battlefield. You know, we've got 360,000 new exploits being written every single day to prevent or to help people break into organisations. So you get a lot of what's called a 0-day risk. So because people are investing so much money in finding new ways to break into organisations, they're finding new ways to get in and using those methods to break into companies before the people that are writing the software or Microsoft or however they're getting in know that that flaw even exists in their software. And so there is no fix for it. A really important thing to understand is that there is no silver bullet or a single protection for any organisation. And so again, going back to that house analogy, you can't just say, well, okay, I've made sure that my front door's locked, so we're safe. No, you should probably put some bars across the windows. Putting a security camera up would be good. Maybe put a dog in the backyard and build a higher fence. You know, there are lots of different ways to break into an organisation. There's not one single fix that we or anybody can put in place that makes you safe. And so security is what's known as a multi-factor defense. You know, you have to know all the potential ways into your company so that you can start locking down those risks. So there is no such thing as fully protected, and it's really important to know that. You know, if companies like Facebook, Equifax, etc. are getting breached, you're never going to stop everybody. But the chances of you coming under, your business coming under a direct targeted attack that would break through the cybersecurity defenses that you have in place is fairly low, but it can still happen, and that's why there are other things like backups and disaster recovery and those sorts of things that also come into play, and most definitely insurance. That's something that we talk to all of our clients about, is making sure that they have the adequate insurance in place, because you need that safety net to give you that protection of if the worst does happen. And what you'd most definitely want to do is to stop the first attack, because once you've been breached once, you are going to be significantly targeted by directed attacks after that, because once it becomes known out in the cybercrime community that your company has been successfully breached, you're known as a target. They'll keep coming after you, and we've seen this happen to organisations that once they've had that first breach, they come under increasingly sophisticated attacks, which means they need to spend more money trying to protect themselves. And so next we need to look at what the mitigation strategies are to combat these threats are. And so, as Norman said at the start of the talk, your people are your biggest risk. And the reason that they're your biggest risk is that good people, unfortunately, will still do some dumb things sometimes. Hacking a person is much easier than hacking a piece of computer software. It's much easier for somebody to call up and try to talk somebody through doing something like installing software on the computer, or it's much easier to send an email that looks like it's come from one of your key clients asking you to download their invoice, or it's much easier to hack into somebody's mailbox and then send an email out to all of their customers telling them that their bank account details have changed and please pay all future invoices into this new bank account in Hong Kong. You know, this sort of stuff happens all the time. It's much easier to hack people than it is to hack computers. And almost 90% of successful cyber breaches involve some form of human error at some point along the way. So these can be things like, as I said, clicking on a bad link in a phishing email, falling for a spear phishing campaign, which is, you know, the one where you get the email from the CEO saying, you know, I need you to transfer this money. We've had this big deal come through. I'm just about to get on a plane. Please do this straight away. People use the same password across multiple websites. I used to be guilty of this myself. I had the same password since I was 15 years old up until about 4 years ago. And so if any website that you use that password on gets breached, that password can then be used to try to get into all of the other services that you own. And lots of people do this. Most people do this. And so, you know, even something as simple as using one password for your corporate computer login as you do for your kids' daycare centre, that's all it can take to get a breach into an organisation. People put data in unsecured and unauthorized locations, and we see this all the time. You know, you see the sales guys have installed Dropbox because they want to make it easy to share files with their customers or get access to data when they're out on the road or at sales conferences and those sort of things. And the business and the IT team have no idea that it's happened, and that's an unsecured location. You know, you see people putting things on USB sticks. You know, see people downloading things to their phone or their laptop, and then it gets stolen out of their car, and that data's now effectively being breached. People using personal devices for business purposes. You know, people bring their own laptops in, they bring their own phones in. What happens when that person leaves? You know, if you as a company don't have control over that device and control over that data, what happens when that person leaves? And then, as I said, you get what's called shadow IT. So people working around the set processes and policies that are in place in the organisation because they want to make their job easier. All of these things are examples of, you know, nobody going out of their way to be malicious, but it's people just trying to do their job the easiest way they know how, and that can lead to really large exposures and really large risks for businesses. So one of the first things, and probably the most critical element that you can do for your business, is to train your team. So you want to train them how to spot a phishing email. You want to train them how to stop them clicking on that ransomware link. You know, look at the email address, look at the link. Does it look legitimate? You know, you want to tell them how to spot a farming website. So one where, you know, it looks like you're trying to log into your Office 365 account, but it's really somewhere that's just trying to steal your credentials to hack into you later on. You know, you want them to know that Telstra and Microsoft will never ever call them to tell them that there's a virus on their computer and they just need to click on this link so that this person can get access to fix it for them. What you really want to do is train your people to be skeptics. You want them to be thinking about what it is that they're doing. So if they receive that email from, you know, from one of your suppliers saying that, hey, our bank account details have changed, you want them to think about it and have processes in place around, I'm just going to give that company a call on the phone number that I have in my contact list or is on their website and just verify that they have actually changed their bank account details and this isn't a scam. And what you want to support that with is good process and policy, you know, good governance within your organisation. So you want to empower people to make good decisions and you want to limit their ability to make bad decisions. You know, what we're effectively trying to help them do is swim between the flags. You know, give them that guidance as to this is what's good business practice and safe business practice, and this is what's not considered to be safe. And so you can help them do that by putting in really strong policies and good governance, like how to handle data confidentially, have BYOD policies. So, okay, if you want to hook up your own personal phone to our work email account, you have to install this piece of software first. That means that you have to have a passcode locked on it, and that if your phone gets stolen, we can wipe our company data off that phone. Or if you leave the organization, we won't be able to touch your stuff, but we can get all of our company data off. Having that policy in place before people are allowed to connect their own personal devices to corporate networks. Have good processes around staff onboarding and offboarding. You know, making sure that the IT department know as soon as someone leaves the organisation, so they can reset passwords, so they can wipe devices, so they can do all the things that they need to do to make sure that data doesn't leave the company. You can put policies in place around shadow IT. Tell people, we don't want you installing Dropbox. We don't want you putting this data on unencrypted USB sticks. This is why. This is the risk to the organisation. These are the things that we have in place to help you do your job. If that doesn't work for you, come and talk to us so we can find a solution. And very importantly, having a cyber response plan and data handling and privacy policy in place. We've worked with a lot of organisations who have suffered a data breach and have suffered much larger consequences than they should have, because they didn't have plans in place as to how to handle a cybersecurity incident until after it happened. They didn't know who to call. They didn't know what to do with their IT systems. They didn't know if they had the right insurance in place. They just had nothing in place as to how to handle an incident like this, and it meant that their downtime and the loss of data that they suffered was much larger than if they had have had a policy in place that, you know, this is our insurance broker, contact them as soon as an incident happens. This is our legal person. This is our PR and marketing person, so that we can get an advisory up on our website or get in touch with our clients really quickly. This is the contact details of our, you know, cybersecurity forensic incident response team, so that we can get on top of this breach quickly and try to limit the damage. You know, having those plans in place before something happens, like anything in business, is obviously important, because once the cat's out of the bag, it's much harder to stop. And then, like I spoke about earlier, actually having insurance in place around this stuff. Cyber liability insurance for me is a must-have for any single business. And so culture is really important as well. As I said, part of the problem is that with all of these, you know, new breaches coming out every day and new ways of being hacked, you can't always have a foolproof technical solution in place. So you need to have your people aware of the culture around it. So around how to defend your company, why it's important to your business that you have a cyber aware and cyber resilient culture. So leading from the front, having the senior executives taking a role in this. Cybersecurity reviews being part of the standing agenda for board and senior management meetings, to make sure that the senior team of the business is aware of where the plans are up to, what the risks are that still remain, are there any new risks that have come to light, those sorts of things. Obviously knowing where your sensitive data is. You know, one of the jobs that we do a lot with clients is actually helping them review their data, because most organisations over time will find that despite however nicely they've had their file and folder structure on their systems laid out, people will just make new folders. They'll save things to a convenient location. They'll dump something there temporarily and then leave it there forever. And so an organisation might think that they've got all of their confidential and sensitive data locked down really tightly, but the reality is that it's usually not the case. There's usually data floating around, freely accessible for anybody who could access it, who might breach the organisation, to just go and take really important information that could constitute notifiable data breaches that could lead to some really severe repercussions for the company. So knowing where your data is and knowing what the important data of your organisation is and where it's stored is very important. And as I said, probably the single biggest thing is knowing and understanding the risks to the company. So, you know, engage a specialist who knows cybersecurity, who can help you assess your business risk and your business's exposure, so that then you can go and develop your own risk management plans. And then developing obviously robust business continuity plans and testing them. So as I said, a lot of businesses, or not a lot, but we've dealt with several businesses now who thought they had good backup plans in place. You know, they had their data being backed up to a tape or a hard drive or something like that, but they weren't testing the process. And when the worst happened, when they got a ransomware attack, when all of their data was locked, they found that their backups either hadn't been going off site, or the person responsible for it hadn't been checking it, or they hadn't been being alerted, or their IT company hadn't been managing it properly, and all their data was effectively lost because they didn't have a robust plan in place, and it hadn't been checked and routinely tested to make sure that it was working. And so finally, we'll talk about a little bit about the technical stuff behind this, the tech. But the reality is, and as I've spoken about throughout this whole presentation, the tech behind cybersecurity and cybersecurity defense doesn't matter until you understand the business. You know, until you understand what the effect of an attack will have on your business, until you've got the plans in place, until you have a budget, until you know what your key risk indicators are, until you know all of this information, there's no point trying to put in place any technical solutions, because it may not be addressing what the actual risks of your company are. And so there is help out there available. The Australian government, as I said, is really trying as hard as they can to get this information out to as many companies as possible. So, said the ACSC, Australian Signals Directorate, have combined to make the cyber.gov.au website. And so in that, they've got lots of good resources for all businesses of all sizes, for individuals, for directors, for IT companies like me. They're really trying to put out there as much information as can be used as possible to help organisations protect themselves. And they've got a resource that can be used as a starting framework for managing or for implementing defences within any organisation. They call it the Essential 8. So basically, it's 8 mitigation strategies that they consider to be the most essential ones that, if applied to all businesses, would significantly reduce the likelihood of a successful cyber attack. So these are things like multi-factor authentication, restricting who can have access to what data, all of those sort of basic things that are universally common to pretty much every single business. And so what is it that you can take away from this today to start thinking about what it is that you can do to protect yourself? So multi-factor authentication is probably, while there is no single silver bullet, this is probably the single biggest technical thing that you can implement to protect your business. So multi-factor authentication is a second form of authentication when you log into a system. So it's like when you go to do a bank transfer and you've never transferred any money to that person before, it will say, we've just sent a message to your phone, you know, a 6-digit code to your phone, please enter this in to complete the transfer. That's multi-factor authentication. So any single system that has an internet-facing login, so whether that be your email, you know, your accounting system, any online system that you may have, your HR system, anything like that that has a web-facing interface should have multi-factor authentication in front of it. Because if you have that, if somebody's password gets stolen, the chances are that an attacker won't have that person's phone as well. So they won't have the pop-up on the screen saying, is this you really trying to log into the phone? Or they won't have the 6-digit code that it's asking for, or any of those multi-factor techniques. So that's the single biggest thing that you can start with. Obviously, being skeptical and training your team to be skeptical is really important. So 97% of ransomware is delivered by email. And so teaching people to look at the sender's address and not the name of the person that's emailing them to make sure that it's a legitimate email. You know, hovering over any links before you click on them. You know, does the link look weird? If somebody's asking you to download an invoice, does it look like it's actually coming from Xero, or does it look like it's coming from some weird website that doesn't look like it has anything to do with that? Being skeptical about if your boss is suddenly asking you by email to urgently purchase gift cards or transfer $170,000 to Big Love Corporation in Hong Kong, give them a call to confirm. Both of these are real-world examples that that we have seen clients that we've worked with do. So the $170,000, the CEO, in inverted commas, sent an email to the CFO of the company saying, I'm just about to hop onto a plane, but we've just landed this really big deal, but to make it happen, I need you to transfer $170,000 to this bank account. The CFO immediately complied, transferred the $170,000, The bank account details provided were wrong, so they got the bank refused the transaction. So the CFO replied to that email from the CEO saying, "Hey, can you just confirm those details? Looks like they were wrong." The attacker then wrote an email back saying, "Yep, sorry about that, gave you the wrong details. Here are the right bank account details," and off the $170,000 went to Big Love Corporation in Hong Kong, never to be seen again. So that was obviously a fairly major consequence for that organisation, because they didn't have the training in place, they didn't have the policies in place, they weren't a skeptical organisation. Don't use public Wi-Fi without a VPN. So if you go to the airport, if you go to a hotel, anything like that where it's just free public Wi-Fi, where you don't have to put in a password or anything like that, means that any data that you send over that internet connection is unencrypted, which means passwords, usernames, bank account details, anything like that that you're transferring while you're on that Wi-Fi connection can effectively be stolen by anybody else on that network if they're looking for it. So if you're going to be using those things, you're at Macca's and you want to jump on the Wi-Fi to do a quick transaction, make sure that you've got a VPN in place. These things are really easy to do. A couple of bucks a month to a place like NordVPN, who you've probably seen advertised on the TV, will mean that you've got that encryption in place and you can use public Wi-Fi. Obviously, as we spoke about, don't use reuse any passwords. So use a password management system like LastPass, which can generate really complex passwords and then just fill them in for you when you go to the website, which means you've got a different password for every single website, for every single service, without having to remember them all. And then make sure that all of your devices are set up with passcodes. They're encrypted, they're locked down, so if anything gets lost, the data that's on there, lost or stolen, the data that's on there is safe. And finally, as a business, engage with a professional organisation to help you assess your risk. Understanding your risk and the potential consequences of a cyber breach really is the key starting point for any cybersecurity plan. You can't do anything else until you know what your risks are, what it could potentially cost you, and what it might cost to implement something to mitigate that risk. And so I'm mindful of the time, so we'll just quickly go through these so we can get to some questions. Key takeaways are that you aren't being specifically targeted. Everybody is being targeted all the time, and that cybersecurity is a business issue and not just an IT issue, and that the risk mitigation strategies need to start with the business educating themselves about their risks. So please take your time to educate yourself. There are so many good things available online to go and look at. And as I said, cyber criminals aren't hackers, they're just opportunists. So take away the opportunity and you'll take away a lot of the risk. Finally, if you manage it through a risk management process, your chances of getting a successful result is going to be much higher than if you just randomly throw money at the dartboard and see what you can put in place. And making sure, as we know, people are the weakest link. They are the way that organisations will breach you. So train them up, train them how to swim between the flags, spot the phishing emails, and you will protect yourself a lot. And if you don't have security by design, you'll end up with security by accident, which obviously significantly increases your risk. So that's me for today. So thank you very much, Norman, for inviting me along, and for everybody for joining us today. Norman, I'll hand back to you.
Okay, as you can tell, Owen's pretty passionate about this topic, and I'm sure he could probably talk for another half hour if he wanted to. If anyone's got questions, please type them up in the questions section of I've gone blank. There's a question section on your link, so please type up your questions there. We have one question. What are your thoughts on cyber security insurance if a business has already addressed the issue of server backups and offsite/cloud solutions? FYI, we have suffered a cybersecurity ransom attack in the past.
Yeah, so my thoughts on that is that cybersecurity insurance is an absolute must for any organisation. So look, having offsite backups and those sort of things is fantastic, and making sure they're air gapped. They're going to the cloud, they're going to an offsite location that can't be directly accessed if a breach happens. That's taking care of one factor of potential risks that you have from cybersecurity. So cyber liability insurance can help with lots of other things as well, not just ransomware. So it can help with regulatory fines through breaches. It can help with things like getting PR involved to go and put together a strategy to go and tell all your clients about a breach if you have to. It can pay legal fees if one of your clients takes you to court because you've lost a key part of information for them, or you've been used as a launching point for an attack on their organisation. So for me, cyber liability insurance is fantastic. Every business needs it.
Another question: is there somewhere that someone can go and learn about how to recognise phishing attacks and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you just go to the cyber.gov.au website, that's a really good centralised point for resources on for individuals, for businesses. Basically, if you go through there, it's a new website, so they've built it with a really good interface, and it's really easy to kind of follow the links to get to the information that you need. So I always recommend that people go there as a starting point for any type of education. Obviously, going beyond that, there's security awareness training type things that you can do. So that's what we do with a lot of our clients, is we actually conduct security awareness training on behalf of our company. So we'll come in, train people, key people in the organisation on how to look out for these things, and then do things like launching fake phishing attacks on that company. So we will send the fake emails and then see how many people click on the link, and then provide training to those people to help them spot, help them learn what they did wrong. And then obviously provide that feedback to management so that they can continually assess how vulnerable their team is to those phishing attacks.
Someone's also asked about access to the slides. This webinar has been recorded, and everyone who has registered will receive a link within 24 hours, which will take them to the recording of the webinar. So you'll get the slides through watching the webinar. Does anyone else have any more questions before we wrap up today's webinar? We've got a bunch of people in the room here live. Anyone got a question? No? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Matthew. He's been putting up a few notes. If anyone does have any questions, then please feel free to send us an email, either direct to myself, or you can go to Owen. Probably the easiest way to get to Owen is to send an email to me, and I can forward it on to him. He's a very busy man, and he's one of those CEOs that's just getting on and off a plane all the time, because I can rarely get onto him. So once again, thank you everyone for joining the webinar. And our next webinar in our series will be in 2 months' time. The topic has yet to be decided, so if anyone's got any ideas, we're welcome to suggestions. And goodbye.